Storytime, my sister and I live in the same house, but we haven't spoken to each other in 2 years. So a little background information, I was 17 years old and a junior in high school, and my sister was only a year younger than me, so she was 16 and a sophomore in high school. My sister struggled a lot in school with making friends because she wasn't very likable. She had a really bad attitude, she would bully people all the time about their appearances. So naturally, this made her quite a few enemies. And I just so happened to be really good friends with the older siblings of the kids that she would bully. And they were always coming to me saying, hey, get a hold of your sister before we do. And whenever I would warn her about this, she would literally say that she didn't care and she wishes somebody would confront her about it. Now, my sister did have a group of friends who all were notorious for loving fighting and bullying others as well. So in my head, I was like, okay, at least she has them to back her up. However, things took a turn for the worse whenever she took some inappropriate photos of a girl changing in the locker room and shared them around the whole school. This girl was a freshman and she just so happened to be a sibling of one of the girls in my sister's group. She also had another sister who was a Part 2, my sister and I live in the same house, but we haven't spoken to each other in 2 years. So like I said, my sister took some pictures of this girl in the locker room and sent them around the whole school. And this girl's older sister was a part of my sister's friend group. I didn't know about this until rumors reached me that my sister was going to be jumped after school. So instead of going straight to my boyfriend's house after school that day, I drove her home instead. The next day, my best friend texted me in the morning saying, hey, you might want to walk around with your sister because they're going to try to get her in the locker room. So my best friend and I took turns all day watching after my sister. And sure enough, whenever we went into the locker room with her, there were 7 girls waiting to fight her. Here's the thing, I'm not a fighter. Fighting isn't fair to begin with, so I picked up this metal scooter next to me and I just start swinging it at them. Thankfully, security guards and teachers intervened before anything terrible happened. They looked at my sister as the victim, so all of us ended up getting suspended except for her. Fast forward after my suspension, I go back to school. Everything was normal until I went to the library during lunch. All of the girls who got suspended plus 5 more girls were all staring at me. Like for part 3. Part 3, my sister and I live in the same house, but we haven't spoken to each other in 2 years. So like I said, everyone except for my sister got suspended, which I don't even know how that happened. But fast forward after my suspension, I returned to school and everything was normal until I went to the library during lunch. When I got there, those same girls that got suspended plus 5 more girls were all staring at me while I was walking over to my table to go study and eat. And then I see this one girl that is known for fighting, so she has to have a security guard with her at all times. Like, this guy literally had her on a leash 24/7. So when I didn't see him with her, that's when I knew it was time for me to get up and go. So I grab all my things and I go to walk out of the library. And then all of a sudden, I feel someone yank my hair and it was over for me. All those girls ended up getting suspended again, and I ended up getting suspended for that picture because my sister went around and told everyone in school that it was me who took the picture and I was the one bullying that girl online through fake accounts. And my sister told everybody that I was going to be in the library during lunch that day. Her and I still live at our parents' house, but we do not speak to each other at all.
My father-in-law is forcing my husband to break up with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. This is a 3-part story time and I'm doing a full face of pink makeup today. My husband and I have been married for 2 years. Now, we did get married very, very young. By very young, I mean I was 18 and he was 19. When we started dating in high school, his dad was totally against the relationship. See, my husband was super popular. He played on the football team. All the girls chased him. He also played basketball and was perfect at everything he did. As you can imagine, was extremely strict with him. He was not even allowed to go out on weekends. Me, on the other hand, my parents are pretty much hippies. They let me do whatever I want. We're all very spiritual. My parents have full trust in me. Because of this, I make smart decisions. I actively seek my parents' advice. I even told my parents I lost my virginity when I did. And we had a big conversation about it. It was not dramatic. It was not like, oh, you shouldn't have done that. They just support me in everything I do. Now, my husband's parents are not the same. They tell him not to do a lot of things. They try to control him. So as we were dating in high school, his dad kept telling him to break up with me. He claimed that I was holding him back and that because of me, he spent less time training, which technically, yes, is true. But at the same time, you cannot stop your son from experiencing human relationships. In fact, he actually broke up with me for 2 weeks, but then we got back together in secret. Everything culminated when he asked me to marry him right after graduation. His parents were absolutely against it, but my parents were all for it. You guessed it, go to part 2. My father-in-law wants my husband to break up with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I was sending me on Instagram. This is a 3-part story time and I'm doing a full face of pink makeup. When he asked me to marry him right out of high school, his parents absolutely freaked. They went to my parents' house and told me off for saying yes. In other words, they were completely blaming me for the whole thing. As if their own son didn't go buy a ring and ask me to marry him. He even did a beautiful proposal, which he had been planning for months. But at this point, his parents didn't even know that we were boyfriend and girlfriend. When they came to my house, his mom, my now mother-in-law, started crying and yelling at me. She told told me that I was ruining their family, that I was trying to steal her son, and that all I really cared about was their money. By the way, my parents were middle class, but we were not destitute. His parents are very rich. They own several businesses. But of course, I'm not after their money. That's when they said that if we did end up getting married, I would have to sign a prenup. And duh, I said, yeah, I want to marry him because I'm in love. At this point, his parents knew they couldn't stop us. We were going to get married with or without their approval. But thankfully, his parents came around and let us get married. We had a quaint, small wedding. It was so magical. But his parents wanted him to go to college to play football. In other words, they wanted him to be the next Tom Brady. They made him train for hours. And they didn't even let us live together for the first year we were married. And because they were supporting him, he couldn't say no. They had us on a schedule. Could only see him for about 2 to 3 hours a day. And we were married. 2 years later, he's playing for a football team. But his parents keep thinking that I'm dragging him down. So now they're trying to convince him to leave me. Go to part 3. My father-in-law is trying to convince my husband to divorce me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, and this is the final part of the 3-part story time, doing a full face of pink makeup. After a year of us being married, his parents did not allow us to live together because he needed to focus on football. So obviously, I was living with my parents. I was focusing on my own studies, but his parents did allow us to see each other 2 to 3 hours a day. Now, you might think my husband is a total pushover, but let me explain something. His parents paid for all of his training and his entire college tuition. They gave him the best of everything. He got sports massages every single day. They even installed a cold plunge in their backyard. They also had a full gym setup where he and his teammates would go work out every single day. In their house. Obviously, he did not have time for little old me. After a year of this, I couldn't take anymore. I wanted to be with my husband. So I gave him an ultimatum. That he tell his parents that he and I wanted to live together. That's all I wanted. I was even willing to pay for half of the rent. And he told his parents, they said fine. And they bought us a house. Obviously under my husband's name, not mine. Fast forward another year up until now. I've heard his dad tell him on several occasions that he needs to divorce me. That he could find a much prettier wife once he becomes bigger in the NFL. And I walked in on his mom telling him that maybe I can't even have kids. And that he should have me checked. My parents-in-law hate me. I sometimes feel like I am holding him back. They make us miserable. My parents think I should just walk away from the marriage, but I'm too in love. Should I confront my parents-in-law? Help me think of what I should say to them.
Storytime about why I will never babysit ever again. So, little background information. I was 17 and a senior in high school. And my parents were super annoyed about the fact that I hadn't had a job since I was 14. So their friends just happened to need a babysitter. So they told me that I had to do it. So fast forward, I go over there super early in the morning and the mom had already left for work. And the dad, who we're gonna call Will, he was just about to leave. And before he walked out the door, he told me that there was a list of things that needed to be done before they got home. So their daughter Autumn, who was 5 years old, she was still sleeping. And I was reading through the list and it was just normal stuff. Like nap time at 2 o'clock, no pop after 7 o'clock, that sort of stuff. And then it had an arrow pointing towards the back. And when I flipped the page over, it said, by the way, Autumn is scared to bathe by herself, so please get a shower with her. And I was not comfortable with that, so I called my mom and I told her about it, like for part 2. Part 2 about why I will never ever babysit ever again. So like I said, I flipped the page over and it said that their daughter was scared to bathe alone, so I would have to take a shower with her. And I called my mom and I told her about it. And she was like, well, honey, that doesn't sound that weird. Don't you remember when your little brother was scared of the toilet and we would have to take him to the bathroom and stand there with him for 20 minutes while he tried to go to the bathroom? So I was super annoyed that she was even comparing those two situations. Because first of all, that was my little brother. Second of all, this is just freaking weird. So I told her to bring my bathing suit over and then I did everything on the list. Fast forward, Autumn said that she really liked me, so her parents wanted me to come over and babysit again. So I did, and whenever I was setting up the shower that day, there was a stack of towels sitting on the toilet, and when I picked it up to move it, a camera fell out of the pile of towels as soon as I picked it up, and it was recording. I was really weirded out, but I wanted to show it to my mom, so Part 3 about why I will never ever ever babysit ever again. So like I said, I picked up the stack of towels and a camera that was recording fell out of it. And while I was home later that night, I was waiting for my mom to get home when I got a call from Will. And if you don't remember who that is, that's Autumn's dad. And of course I wasn't going to answer the phone because I was super weirded out and low-key scared. But then he left a voicemail. And he was like, hey, so, I know you have the camera. And this is kind of awkward, but I'm gonna need it back. I can pay you whatever you want, and I would prefer that we don't tell anybody about this. Sometimes I'm just really amazed at how stupid people are because as soon as my mom got home, I showed her the camera, and I let her listen to the voicemail. So my mom called over Autumn's mom. So they called the police, and Autumn's mom kept trying to call Will, but his phone was going straight to voicemail. And she was like, yeah, he begged me not to come over here whenever you called. It's been a week since this happened, and Autumn's dad is currently running from the cops.
Story time about how I found out my husband was hooking up with men off of Craigslist. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It's not me on Instagram. My husband and I have been married for 5 years. This man is the most prudish person I have ever met in my entire life. He never curses. He does not drink. Basically, he's never done anything naughty in his life. When we met, he was the perfect candidate for me. My parents are very religious and very strict. When they saw the way my husband was, basically super uptight, never wanting to do anything fun, they insisted that I marry him. So basically, this is all my parents' fault. To be honest with you guys, I never really was super attracted to him, but I knew that he would be a good provider. He's pretty high up in the company he works for, and he makes north of $300,000 per year. But I do own 2 of my own businesses, so it's not like I need him to survive. But my parents insisted on me marrying somebody who was already well off. And of course, one of my dreams is to become a mother, so I need a man who's going to be able to provide for me and my kids, especially when I'm pregnant. So we ended up getting married. Was there passion and chemistry? Not so much. But we did have a good time, and he would make me laugh. We essentially became really good friends. Up until I found some stuff on his laptop. Part 2 is that. Part 2 of how I found out my husband was hooking up with men off of Craigslist. Disclaimer, is not my story time. It's me on Instagram. One day while I was working from home, I needed to get on his laptop to check our cameras. I just gotten a new set of security cameras for our house. I needed to make sure that they were all working. I opened his laptop, type in the password, and it was wrong. It always had the same password for the past 5 years. I didn't bother texting him. Instead, I tried to guess. And because I know this man so well, I guessed it in the first try. But as soon as I log in, there's about 5 Craigslist windows open, all with similar titles. Male looking for male. Male interested in male company. This literally shook me to my core. You're telling me that I'm married to a gay man and that he's hooking up with men off of Craigslist? That's when I went ahead and checked his email, only to find that he had been sending pictures and other things to these men. Not only that, but he had met with 2 of them. I instantly printed out all the evidence. Like I said in part 1, I'm not particularly attracted to my husband. I never have been. I really only married him because my parents pressured me into it. Here's what I did. Instead of just asking for a divorce, I wanted to humiliate him. I needed to make him pay. After printing everything out, I sent it to his job. And I sent it to his parents and my parents. Part 3 is up. That's when I sent videos of my own husband hooking up with other men to his job, my parents, and his parents. At this point, I had been married to a man that I wasn't attracted to for 5 years, only to find out that he was hooking up with other men off of Craigslist. Remember I said in part 1 how prudish my husband was? He always made himself seem like he was the perfect man, like he had never done anything bad in his life. But let me tell you, some of the things I read in those emails, and the pictures, and the video, disgusting. No wonder he put off having kids for so long, and no wonder he made me get on the pill, because he never had the intention of having kids. When everyone received their packages, my husband called me super upset. He said that he had only done it for about a week, and that it was just him experimenting. Then he told me that his job put him on suspension. My parents, of course, stopped speaking to him. My mother-in-law calls me on the phone and tells me that she had always known that he was gay, and apparently they insisted on him not marrying me. But he was set on having the perfect wife, the perfect life. We're obviously getting a divorce now, and I'm getting all his money, or at least I'm gonna try. He's already claiming that I'm obsessed with him, so he wants to get a restraining order. I need to make him suffer even more. How should I do this? Part 4 will be up soon.
Story time about how my mom got with my sister's boyfriend. So a little background information. I was 13 and in 8th grade, and my sister was a senior in high school and she was 17. And my sister always had a new boyfriend. Like after 3 months of dating somebody, they would break up and then she would be with a new guy a month later. And this started whenever she was a sophomore. So yeah, she had a lot of boyfriends. Anyway, so she had started dating this boy, and we're gonna call him Ben. Well, lucky for Ben, whenever they started dating was right around the time when we were supposed to go on our vacation that we take every year. So my mom and dad said that he could come with us. So my sister, who we're gonna call Emily, she decided to bring Ben, and I decided to bring one of my friends, Carly. We drove down, everything was good for the first 2 days, and usually what would happen on this vacation is my dad would end up staying at the hotel and doing work while we were all out doing stuff. So my mom, Ben, and Emily were all out drinking at the bar 24/7. Like for part 2. Part 2 about how my mom got with my sister's boyfriend. So like I said, Emily, Ben, and my mom were out drinking 24/7 at the bar. And since this was a vacation that we took every year, my sister already knew a bunch of people down there. The one night my mom started feeling really sick at the bar, so Ben offered to take her back to the hotel. And at this time, my friend, my dad, and I were all down at the buffet in the hotel. So Ben took my mom upstairs to our hotel room, and my dad was like, "Oh, do you guys want to walk down to the fair?" We said yes, so he told us to go upstairs and get his wallet. So my friend and I go up in the elevator to our room, and I want to say this was about 20 or 30 minutes after Ben and my mom had went upstairs. So we get into the room, we hear the shower running, which was weird because we didn't think anybody was there. So instead of me calling my dad because it might have been a murderer, I go, and the door slightly creaked open, so I look through the door, and obviously I could hear you know what, but hers and his clothes were on the floor. Like for part 3.
This is how I found out my dad was following me on OnlyFans. Disclaimer, it's not my story time, it's not on Instagram. My mom and dad had me when they were really young. My mom was 17 and my dad was 19. For some reason, my mom doesn't like talking about him, so I never really found out exactly how they broke up. All I know is that they stayed together until I was 5 years old. Something really bad happened and then my mom kicked him out of the house. Like I said, I don't even know what happened. I was 12 years old, he begged my mom to come back, and she let him live in the apartment we had. But he's pretty much a deadbeat. He didn't help my mom pay for the bills. He didn't even want to get a job. He even went as far as begging my mom to become a stripper. He said that she would make way more money than the job she had. She was a secretary at the time. When I was 15, he left our house again. I never got a bad feeling from him when he was living with us though. With a lot of hard work, my mom was able to put me through college. I graduated and I got a really good job. I bought my mom and me a house and we moved in together. Then COVID happened and I lost my job. Friends suggested I start OnlyFans and I decided to do it. I started making a lot more money than I ever thought I would. Some months I was making around $20,000. This one guy would send me $1,000 every single week. In exchange for pictures. Part 2 is up. This is how I found out my dad was following me on OnlyFans. Disclaimer, is not my story time, it's on Instagram. So this one guy started sending me $1,000 every single week. In exchange, I would send him private photos. Everything was totally fine until he started asking me questions. He would ask me things like, what's your favorite movie? What's your favorite dessert? Because it's OnlyFans, I never really answered honestly. But then one day he told me, you love The Little Mermaid, don't you? And I was like, what? Because The Little Mermaid was my favorite movie as a kid. Watched it at least 3 times a week when I was a kid. First I thought it was a cousin playing a joke on me, so I decided to block them. The next day, I get another message. This one says, I remember how you used to love hot dogs. That's when I really shit myself. Because my dad and I would make hot dogs every single Friday. It was our thing together. Like I said, he was a deadbeat, so he couldn't afford anything more than cheap hot dogs. And that's when he said, I have a confession. And before I could reply, he said, I'm your dad. I felt so disgusted. I blocked him and then blocked him from my cell phone too. That's when he sends me a long text message explaining why he signed up to my OnlyFans. He said that he was just trying to get to know me, that all he really wanted was to get me back as his daughter. Then why ask for nudes? Part 3 is up. This is how I found out my dad was following me on OnlyFans. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it's sending me on Instagram. As soon as I read his long text message about why he signed up, I once again blocked him. 20 minutes later, there's a knock on my door. Yep, it's my fucking father. Started knocking on the door so hard my neighbors came out. Called 911 and they came within a minute. I live in an area where there aren't too many people, so my house is really easy to find. Saw my dad walk to the backyard and try to get in through the back. That's when a cop stopped him and asked him what he was doing. Then he told the cop that I had invited him over. Then the cop comes to my door and asked me if I had invited him. I told him I didn't. Then I told the cop about OnlyFans. My dad was so ashamed he actually denied it. But of course I had all the receipts. I showed the cop my phone and the cop told him that he needed to leave me alone. He left my house and I didn't have the heart to tell my mom. But later that night I see another person sign up to my OnlyFans. Turns out it was my dad again. This time he was offering me $3,000 for more pictures. And he confessed that he couldn't help but love me as a woman because I didn't grow up with him. Excuse me, sir? You raised me for half of my childhood. Wanted to get a restraining order, but the judge says it's not that easy. So now I'm considering closing my OnlyFans. I don't think it's fair though. What should I do?
Storytime about why I will never let my sister pet sit for me ever again. So a little background information, I was 18 and it was the summer before my freshman year in college. And it was towards the end of the summer, so I decided that I wanted to take a vacation with a few of my girlfriends before we all went off to the different colleges that we were going to. And I have a lot of pets. I have 4 hamsters, 2 snakes, a tarantula, 2 birds, and 1 fish. So I asked her if she could watch all of them. She said yeah, so I wrote her out a schedule of when they need to be fed. And I wasn't even going to be gone a week, so it would be pretty easy because I already cleaned all their tanks and everything like that. And I wasn't worried at all because I trusted my sister. She had 2 dogs and a cat, so I thought she was going to be fine. I called her the first 2 days. Everything seemed to be going well. And I called her on the 4th day and she didn't answer the phone. So I called my mom, asked her if she could get a hold of her. And my mom said that she spent the 2 days at her boyfriend's house, like for part 2. Part 2 about why I will never let my sister pet sit for me ever again. So like I said, I called my mom asking if she could get a hold of her, and she said that she spent the last 2 days at her boyfriend's house. And the worst part was, my sister was the only one with a key to my apartment. So my sister calls me the next day and she's like, hey, sorry, like I was at my boyfriend's house. And I was like, who fed the animals? And she was like, well, I just put enough in their cages so that way they would be fine for like 3 days. And she was like, don't worry, I'll sleep over there tonight to make sure they're okay. So I'm like having a fucking panic attack right now. Anyways, so fast forward, I get home early in the morning and my sister's sleeping on the couch, but my sister brought over her animals too. So I wake my sister up and I'm like, hey, like, how are all the animals? She's like, oh, they're fine. And then we walk into the kitchen and the fucking bird cage is open and my birds are missing and her cats are nowhere to be found. So now I'm freaking the fuck out. So then I go to check on the rest of my animals, like for part 3. Part part 3 about why I will never let my sister pet sit for me ever again. So like I said, we walk into the kitchen and the bird cage is open and my birds are nowhere to be found and neither is her cat. So at that point, I run to check on all of my other animals. Thankfully, the snakes were fine, so I go to check on my tarantula and he's missing. So now I grabbed my sister's dogs, locked them in my room, and I went to go check on my hamsters. Yeah, she forgot to feed them the whole week because one of them ate the other one. So at this point, I'm having like a mental fucking breakdown and I'm moving all the furniture in the living room and everything like that. And we lift up the couch and we see her cat bolt out from under the couch. After that, I look under the couch and my bird is literally torn into pieces under the fucking couch. A few days later, she texted me and she was like, hey, like, I feel so bad. Like, let me buy you a new bird and a new tarantula. And to this day, 2 years later, I still don't know what happened.
Story time about how my boyfriend is abusive to his parents. What should I do? Disclaimer, not my story time. It's on Instagram. My boyfriend and I have been dating for 11 months. Here's a little backstory. We both work at the same company and live very far from our parents. I try to go home once a month since my parents are only 2 hours away from me. His parents live in a different country. For that reason, I haven't met his parents. But he's met my parents and he's been completely respectful and really nice to them. So I never suspected that he could be abusive to his parents. So here's what happened. We flew over to his parents and they are very rich. His mom is an interior designer and their house is phenomenal. His dad owns a couple of businesses and together they are very wealthy. His parents went to pick us up at the airport and everything was fine until we got to their house. They decided to give me a tour of their ginormous mansion. That's when I noticed that my boyfriend was being kind of rude to them. Every time they would ask me a question, he would answer and be like, duh, she likes pizza. He even asked his mom to stop asking stupid questions. I stopped him in his tracks and in front of his parents I said, why are you being rude to your parents? The look on his parents' face was of shock. And that's when I realized that they had never disciplined him. But then it got worse. Part 2 is up. Story time about how my boyfriend is abusive to his parents. Disclaimer is not my story time. I said on Instagram. The look on his parents' face when I called him out for being rude to them was complete shock. After they gave me the tour of the house, we decided to sit down for dinner. They are so rich that they have their own chef. That's when the chef comes out and starts serving all the food. And as soon as my boyfriend sees what they served, he grabs his glass of water and bangs it against the table. He looks at both of his parents and says, what the fuck is wrong with you both? The color from their faces drain. That's when they said, I'm sorry, we didn't know he was gonna make this. The chef decided to make a really fancy meatloaf. Apparently he hates meatloaf. Then he said, well, tell him to make something else. His mother gets up and runs to the kitchen and asks the chef to make him a burger because that's his favorite food, which, by the way, I never even knew that. He always told me his favorite food was Indian. His mom comes back from the kitchen. Then he looks at me and says, you don't have to eat that shit if you don't want to. I told him that he was being a brat and that I'd be happy to eat the meatloaf. His parents look at me and smile. My boyfriend just gets up from the table and runs away. Can you believe I had to chase after him? Part 3 is up. Story time about how my boyfriend is abusive to his parents. What should I do? Disclaimer is not my story time. It's on Instagram. That's when my stupid boyfriend runs away from the dinner table. So of course I have to chase him. And of course I'm angry at this point. I ask him why he's being so rude to his parents. Then he literally denies that he just did anything. His words were, you're reading too much into it. My parents are stupid anyway. I looked at him and I said, do you not see the mansion we're standing in? How did 2 stupid people manage to build this mansion, 4 businesses, and put you through school? He rolls his eyes at me and says, Jesus Christ, you sound like my parents. I told him that he was a privileged rat. You see, I come from a family where we don't have chefs and we don't have millions of dollars or a mansion. So I appreciate everything my parents did for me. I went back to the dining room and I told his parents it was nice to meet them, but that I could no longer be with their son. That's when his mom started begging me not to leave. It was hard, but I called an Uber and I went home. My boyfriend's been begging me to get back with him. He's trying really hard too. His parents are even offering to pay my student loans. I'm honestly confused now. What should I do?
Story time about how my neighbor killed my dog. So a little background information. When I was about 3 years old, my parents got me a German Shepherd. And my neighbors who lived next to us absolutely loved our dog. And so did their kids. Like their dad literally put a doggy door in the fence, so that way our dog could go back and forth from our house to his house. Well, when I was about 8 years old, my neighbors decided to sell their house. So he told us that he had to take out the doggy door because the people that were buying his house hated animals. Well, the people who had just bought his house, they ended up moving in before he could take out the doggy door. So our new neighbors asked us if we could put like a piece of plywood in front of the door so that way our dog couldn't get through. And they said that they would do the same to their side of the fence. So my dad said, yeah, he put a piece of plywood in front of there. Well, my dog, Gabe, the one night that my brother let him out, he ended up getting the plywood off of the doggy door. Well, my brother literally had to crawl through the doggy door to get the dog before one of them saw him in the yard. Like Part 2 about how my neighbors killed my dog. So like I said, my brother let the dog out, and my dog got the piece of plywood off of the door. And my brother had to crawl through the doggy door to get my dog out of our neighbor's yard, so that way our neighbors wouldn't wake up and know that he got through. But whenever my brother went to go get Gabe, he realized that my neighbors didn't even have a piece of plywood on their side of the fence or anything. So my brother told my dad, and my dad went over there the next day to talk to them. And he pretty much said, I'm not going to have a piece of fucking plywood on my side of the fence if you're not going to be doing anything on yours to prevent my dog from going into your yard. And they were like, oh, well, your old neighbors never took out the doggy door. And my dad was like, that's not our fucking fault. Well, then our new neighbors said, if your dog all of a sudden becomes sick or just does not come back, don't be surprised. My dad decided to replace the door himself. Well, once Gabe realized that the doggy door was gone, when we would let him outside, he would literally just sit there and bark at the fence. Well, 2 weeks later, Gabe ended up passing away, and we found out it's because our neighbors were giving him rat poison.
My boyfriend's brother got me pregnant and now I don't know what to do. 3 months ago, I started dating this new guy. He was so sweet and good looking. He took me to meet his very rich family right away. I walked into their beautiful house and his brother came right up to me and gave me a kiss. Now let me say this. My boyfriend and his brother are almost exactly identical. They are both extremely good looking. They're both super muscular and really good shape. They both have long brown hair. They both have green eyes and tan skin. I mean, they are virtually perfect looking. Here's the difference. My boyfriend is so sweet, while his brother is more of a bad boy. Flirts with me in front of his whole family. And they all think it's hilarious, even my boyfriend. But here's the problem. The more I visited their house, the more I realized I was getting butterflies every time I saw his brother. And it's like his brother knew it. Would look deep into my eyes while we had conversations. He always looked like he was about to kiss me. One day my mother-in-law decided to take me shopping to Bloomingdale's. She ended up buying me a $2,000 necklace. These people have money. When we got back to the mansion, I decided to put the necklace on. But as I was struggling, my boyfriend's brother decided to help me out. Slowly put the necklace on me. Then he started smelling my neck. Then he started kissing my neck. And then he started kissing me and we started making out. I couldn't help it. Part 2 is up. That's when my brother-in-law started kissing my neck. Then he made his way to my mouth, and we started making out, passionately. I physically couldn't stop myself from kissing him. After we kissed for a minute, we realized we were in the kitchen. Anybody could walk in on us. That's when he grabbed my hand and took me outside by the pool. He took me behind the pool house, and then we just started kissing more. We were back there for like 20 minutes. So my phone rings, and it's my boyfriend, his brother. I push him off, and I run back into the house. For the rest of the night, he just kept staring at me, and I basically just tried to avoid his gaze. We didn't talk about the fact that we kissed at all for like 2 weeks. After the 2 weeks, I found myself alone in their house again. He comes up to me and starts trying to kiss me again, but this time I did have a little more self-control. He did something I never expected. He picked me up straight off the couch, threw me over his shoulder, and took me to his bedroom. Then he started kissing me more. And again, I gave in. I couldn't help myself. It's like I physically can't stop myself from touching him. He kissed on his bed, and then it happened. Yep, we did it. It was amazing and magical, but I instantly felt remorse. Let me clear something up though. I am still very, very attracted to my boyfriend. I mean, if anything, I would have rather done it with him, but there's just something about his brother that I find intoxicating. I instantly felt sick to my stomach. I left his room and went back home. My boyfriend called me and asked me why I wasn't waiting for him at his house. I told him that I didn't feel sick, so he came over and brought me chicken soup. I just did the dirty with his brother and he brought me chicken soup? You can imagine how guilty I felt. 2 weeks later, I wasn't getting my period. So I took a test and it turns out I'm pregnant. And I'm pretty sure it's his brother's. I broke the news to him and his family that I'm pregnant and they're so happy. He proposed to me and we're engaged now. His brother, on the other hand, still tries to kiss me. But he just got a new girlfriend. We'll never tell the truth though. Or should I?
Storytime about my strict grandma. So a little background information, in January 2023, I was really looking forward to having a sleepover at my friend's house, but my grandma quickly shut that shit down because she said that my friend was, quote, emo, according to the way my friend dressed. Like, girly, it's 2024. Anyways, I tried to argue with her and say that that doesn't mean that she's a bad influence, but my grandma, stuck in her ways, just wasn't having it. Instead, she said that I was going to be staying the weekend at my aunt's house with my brother and my cousin. So while I was at my aunt's house, I decided to sneak over to my friend Oliver's house. Get your head out of the gutter. It was nothing like that. We both agreed to be strictly friends. Anyway, so I hung out at his house with him and his brother Connor, and we were giving each other's Instagrams a makeover. Now keep this in mind for later. We ended up changing my username to the Beaner 2.0. Oh, and when I said I snuck over Oliver's house, I mean for my grandma. Like, my aunt knew about everything, but my grandma wasn't watching me, so I didn't care to tell her. Fast forward, the weekend's over, my grandma comes to pick us up, and later on that night, she brings up my Instagram username to me. Like for Part 2 about my super strict grandma. So like I said, my grandma brings up my username, the Beaner 2.0, to me later on that night. She started telling me that she was super concerned about the lack of self-respect I had for myself and how I need to start caring more about what other people thought about me. But honestly, I didn't care. I tried explaining that I didn't mind the term Beaner since I'm half Mexican and I've already faced racism before, so to me, it's just a word. After I explained that, I thought that her and I were good because she stopped arguing with me. And then she starts bringing up my Instagram posts. She's like, who are these boys that you were with? Whose house is this? Blah, blah, blah. Because I guess my aunt had told her that I went over a friend's house, but she didn't specify that it was a boy. So my grandma was fine with it. Anyway, so she had a field day with that shit, and the next day she decided to take my phone away because of the consequences of my actions, claiming that this situation was so serious that she had to get the police involved. This whole situation resulted in me being grounded forever, and we had to start attending family therapy sessions after this. Yeah.
My husband told me he wants a second wife. We are practicing Mormons and my husband believes that he deserves a second wife. When we first got engaged, I told him that the only way I would marry him was if he did not take on more wives. We've been married now for 6 months and he's already begging me to get a second wife. Part of me understands why he wants it, but the other part of me thinks it's just gratuitous. No man needs more than one wife. I met a few single women at church and he's been flirting with them nonstop. One of them in particular has been flirting back. Everyone in our church knows that my husband is not allowed to have another wife. This one girl keeps trying to get into our lives. She basically shows up everywhere we do, and she's always trying to catch his eye when we're at church. I found out a dirty little secret about her. A few years ago, she used to be a stripper. I threatened her to stay away from my husband. If not, I would tell him that she was a stripper. She actually told me that my husband wouldn't believe me and that she was gonna marry him anyway. I caught them texting and she was telling him how lonely she is. I told my husband that she was a stripper and he said that he didn't care. That she needed saving? What the heck should I do now? I don't want a second wife. My husband told me he wants a second wife update. That's when my husband told me that he still wants to marry her and that the church could save her. Since the news of her being a stripper in the past didn't turn him off, I had to start digging some more. I went onto her Facebook and started looking back through all of her pictures. I also went on her friends' and family's Facebooks too. On one of her friends' accounts, I found a post from 2012. They were partying it up in the Greek islands. As I looked closer into the picture, I saw there were 2 men with them. I started Googling the men's names and I found that they were both pimps. The more I searched, the more pictures I found of her with this one guy. And in some of the pictures, they were even making out. This is when it hit me. She was probably a pro. And this guy was pimping her out. My husband is so 2000s that he doesn't even have a computer. So I decided to go print out all of the evidence. I printed out all of the pictures of her and this guy, some of her family's pictures of her drinking and partying. I made my husband his favorite dinner and then I sat him down. I told him I would never accept a second wife, especially her. When I showed him all the pictures, he told me he felt sick. Apparently she told him that she was a nun. Remember I said they had been texting? Well, they never stopped texting. Then he confessed that she even sent him a naked picture. Part 2 is my husband told me he wants a second wife update. When he finally accepted that this woman had been a pro in her past and a stripper, he said that he would stop speaking to her. Mind you, this all happened like 2 days ago. I asked my husband to show me his phone so that I could see the messages between them. He handed his phone over and started to cry. He said that she had lied to him and told him that she was a nun. Apparently, after she became a stripper, she decided to leave that life and become a nun. How stupid is my husband that he actually believed her? That's when I saw that she had sent him plenty of nudes. And I asked my husband, "You think that this woman is a nun?" And he said, "You're right, I should have known." We went to church and told on her. Now everyone in the church knows her truth. But things get worse. After she found out that we told on her, she came over to our house and started threatening us. Wouldn't let her in the house, but then she begged my husband to let her in. And he opened the damn door. That's when she begged my husband to take her on as a second wife, and that she would be the best wife and even better than I am. While I'm standing right there. Thankfully, my husband used his one brain cell and said no. That's when she grabbed my hair and started banging my head against the wall. Stupid husband stood there watching. I had to fight her off alone. That's when she looked at both of us and said that we would regret it and she ran away. And my husband had another confession. They had hooked up once. Part 3 is up.